Can everybody tell a story?
Everybody has stories to tell. Everybody can tell a story. Most people, I would say 90% of people that I've ever met, actually, to be honest, 100% can tell a story really well.
Why do we then struggle with telling stories? Try for us as Black people, we don't tell our stories.
Every single community in this world tells its stories. And in private spaces, even on public platforms, I think Africans tell stories all the time. The question is whether it's taken up. So you can tell a story, and if people ignore it, then it's almost as if it's never been told, right? I think Australia is such a young, multicultural society, very complicated place. And I think the question of how you name yourself is so tied to whether or not you truly think that you belong. We know that levels of racism are extremely high in this society. So of course, why do you want to belong to a place where at a general level, there are lots of people who indicate that they don't want you around? We know that for skilled professionals, when they go into the workplace, unless you change your name, you often won't get a call back for a job. It doesn't matter whether you're a good doctor or not. The person will say, I don't want that doctor because you're Black.
Hi, Sisonke.
Hi, Emmanuel.
How are you today?
I'm good. Nice to be here.
For someone that hasn't met you before, they don't know you, they don't know your work, what would you like them to know about you today?
I guess I'd like them to know that I'm an African. I live in Australia. I write. I help people to tell stories. I'm very interested in what it means when we choose, what stories we choose to tell and why.
What does story mean to you?
So when I do my trainings, and I'm helping people to understand stories, I always say that a story is a very simple equation. Event plus meaning equals story. So
Sorry, I'll take that again. Story equals event
plus meaning.
Plus meaning.
Right? So things happen, and then we assign a meaning to those things. And once we put the meaning on what those events were, then we've developed a story. So it's the oldest instinct in humanity, is to say, I was walking in the forest, and then an animal came, and it attacked me, but I was able to escape. Why? Because I was brave. Once you start getting into more than the thing that happened, but assigning a value to it, like courage, because I thought quickly and I moved fast, and right? So that's when you start to develop a story. So a story isn't just the things that happened, it's what we say it meant that it happened.
Can everybody tell a story?
Everybody has stories to tell. Everybody can tell a story. Most people, I would say 90% of people that I've ever met, actually, to be honest, 100% can tell a story really well. What people often get nervous about is that they try to tell a story in a way that they think it's supposed to look like, in a very extroverted, very confident, speaking loud. And if you try to tell a story like that, if that's not who you are as a person, then you won't do a good job of telling a story. So I always say that. Quiet people tell quiet stories. Loud people tell loud stories.
Why do we then struggle with telling stories? You've heard a lot of, try for us as Black people, we don't tell our stories. You hear that a lot. You don't tell our stories, but we tell stories, folklore and other stuff we grew up.
We do tell our stories. So every time people say that to me, I want to interrogate the premise of the statement. Do we not tell our stories? Or is it that we tell our stories and they aren't heard, or they're not amplified, or they're not taken seriously? So I think we do often. Every single community in this world tells its stories. And in private spaces, even on public platforms, I think Africans tell stories all the time. The question is whether it's taken up. Do people listen to us? Do they take us seriously? So you can tell a story, and if people ignore it, then it's almost as if it's never been told, right?
How do you ensure you don't get ignored then? I'll give you an example.
Give me an example.
So for many of us from Africa, you hear the story about how a place was discovered that always existed.
Yeah.
The Victoria Falls.
Yes.
From where I come from, the Niger River it's always been there.
Yeah.
How come how do stories get retold and then over time get lost? Because, we've been taught now that this was discovered by this person, but we all know that has always been there.
That's right. So, obviously, a lot of that has to do with technology and who owns technology, right? So the oldest technology that we currently still continue to work with, the technology that has been so instrumental in the spread of everything from the beginning, has been the technology of reading and writing. And if you are an oral people who tell stories and share stories through word of mouth, through conversations, through music, through dance, because again, a story can be told in multiple ways, right? So if those are the forms through which you tell stories, and yet the forms through which stories are told that live for a very long time, that have longevity in particular kinds of cultures, and that can be monetized, when those ones are written down, then you're already starting to fall behind the curve, right? So I think it's important to recognize that we have and we've always told our stories. It's the listening component. And of course, I mean, the thing that I'm always interested in, the reason I'm a storyteller, the reason I write, is because I'm interested in how our society functions and in shifting power. And so the thing about our stories is that they are powerful, but they can be made less powerful if we don't commit them to writing, or if we don't commit them to the screen the way that you're doing, or if we don't commit them to audio. So we have to archive our stories, because that's the language now of the world that we live in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got a whole lot of questions about the story stuff, but I'm going to come back to that one. If I were to ask someone close to you, your kids, your husband, what would they say you struggle the most with?
I think they would probably say that I do too much.
Okay.
So I say yes to a lot of things, and I probably shouldn't say yes to as many things as I do, but that's probably one of my biggest problems. I'm also very stubborn, and they would probably say not in a good way. I also probably don't take the advice of people who love me.
I'll begin to hear that one.
Or it takes me a long time to take advice from those who love me, because it's part of the stubbornness, but it's also part of the doing too much. All right. So if someone outside is asking me to do things, and I feel a sense of obligation to community because I'm aware that there's few of us, right? There's a relatively small number of African people who have access to the platforms, to the media opportunities that I've been given, et cetera, et cetera. So when people ask you, even if you don't have the time to do it, I think it's important to make the time to do it, because there's so few of us, right? And then I think family would say, yeah, but then you're always out there, and what about us?
How has this impacted you, though?
Look, I think I have good kids, and I also think they understand. And my partner is incredibly supportive and very, very understanding. But there are definitely times when I can feel the strain. I can see, the consequence of missing something. I remember when I was still a young parent, someone said to me, the things you will regret is if you miss something with your children or with your family, and you think to yourself, when you're making that decision, should I do this or not? You should ask yourself, will they remember that I wasn't there in 3 days? Will they remember in 3 weeks? Will they remember in 3 months? Will they remember in 3 years? Right?
Take that again.
So I'm going to miss an assembly for my kid.
Yep.
And I have to make that decision. Should I go to this other thing, or should I attend the assembly? Will my child remember that mommy wasn't there next week? Well, sometimes kids forget very quickly, because your child, it's not a big deal. Will they remember in a year's time? Will they still be thinking, oh my gosh, that event, mommy wasn't there? That's the thing that helps you make the decision about whether or not you're prepared to attend an event or stay, prioritize family, or whether actually this one, it's okay, I can go and be available for the world, right? So there are ways that you have to kind of
wouldn't that be a
learn to
function
make
of
decisions.
The age of the kid? So if it was
Exactly.
3, 4, 5, 6, even 10-year-old, they'll probably forget it.
Precisely. So again, some of it is about the child. It's about your family relationship. But some of it is about what age, and it shifts, right? So over time, I've learned that there are certain things that I can say yes to, because they're older now, it doesn't make that big of a deal. And when they were younger, it's something that stings. It stays with them. But the point is, you know that as a person. And so yes, I struggle with that, but that's definitely one of the ways that I've tried to think about how do I manage that.
Thank you. When you think of the term African Australian, what does that say to you? Is that a term?
I don't know if it's a term. That's a good question. I have been here for 12 years. I have definitely struggled to call myself Australian.
Okay.
And I certainly if we use the metric of other communities, Italian, Australian, Arab Australian, African Australian, then we would say, yeah, of course we belong in that category, right? We are Australian citizens and we are of African descent, so of course we get to own that label. But I think Australia is such a young, multicultural society, very complicated place. And I think the question of how you name yourself is so tied to whether or not you truly think that you belong. And I think that's a story that is still being written in Australia. I think that's a story we are still building for ourselves. If you look at the data, if you look at what we know from surveys about social cohesion and belonging, we know that levels of racism are extremely high in this society. So of course, why do you want to belong to a place where, at a general level, there are lots of people who indicate that they don't want you around? We know that for skilled professionals, when they go into the workplace, unless you change your name, you often won't get a call back for a job, right? That name discrimination is a huge problem amongst many communities in this country. So I think that question about belonging goes to the heart of whether or not people want to call themselves African Australian.
What would you like to see to be able to call yourself that, or to embrace that term? Or at what point would you say, okay, now I think I am safe to say I am African Australian?
So my own relationship with my country, South Africa, is very strong, very rich. And so it's like South Africa is home. And if I say that Australia is also home, I feel like I'm cheating on my lover. And I think it's important to recognize that many people feel that way about their tie and their connection.
Is it because you're the first generation migrant for yourself?
I'm the only one. So I'm the only one who lives outside of South Africa.
From your immediate family?
From my immediate family. Black South Africans only very recently have begun to migrate in kind of significant numbers for obvious reasons of our history, about apartheid, and about the society that we have been trying to build. So in some ways, I feel like an outlier. And so I felt like I'm a South African who happens to live in Australia. That's been primarily how I've thought of myself, how I've spoken about myself. And yet this year, I got Australian citizenship. So then that begins to raise questions about, well, if I'm prepared to pay the taxes and claim benefits, and raised my children here, and my children have a very clear Australian identity because they were raised here for most of their lives. So my youngest was 3, the older one was 6 when they came here. So they're Australians in terms of their material connection to this place in a way that I'm not and I will never be, right? So it's a complicated question, certainly for me at a personal level. And when I look at that next generation of young people who were born here, who were raised here, who don't sound like you and me, they sound Aussie.
Yep.
For that generation of kids, I say to myself, well, of course they're African Australian. And they have every right to claim that title and to give it the kind of meaning that they want. So give it the meaning of a story, right? That they think it deserves. So a lot of what I'm interested in, obviously, because I am here, I live here, I am an African, I'm interested in what happens to African people wherever we may be. A lot of what I'm interested in is how to help them tell the stories of what it means to be Australian.
Take me back to your journey to Australia. Okay. How did you end up here?
So I married an Australian, and we got married in Johannesburg. We met in South Africa. We got married in Johannesburg. It was never on the cards for me to move to this country. And then we had kids, and they started getting a little bit older. He also had family here, and after a while, it was like we spent half of our marriage already on that side. So the first 10 years were that side in South Africa. And so some of the personal dynamics of just being married to someone, and you have to share. If you're coming from 2 different countries, 2 parts of the world, there's a sharing component. And so at a certain stage, it made sense to move here. And so here we are.
What did you have to give up?
I feel like I gave up a lot. And it's interesting because the narrative of migrants, particularly migrants who come from quote unquote poor places, because obviously our places are not poor. They've been impoverished, right?
I like that term. They've been impoverished.
But the narrative in all, these Western countries is that we have to be grateful. Oh, you're so lucky to be here. Oh, you're from South Africa. Oh my gosh, the crime is terrible. You must be so grateful that you're here. Yeah, so that narrative of gratitude and luck is, very ingrained and embedded in the way that people talk both about Australia but also about Africa, right? The sense that it is a hopeless, helpless place, and so those of us who are here must be here because we have this dire need. So I'm always very keen to disabuse people of that notion, right? Because my story is just, I happen to fall in love with someone who happens to be from this country. It could be Germany, it could be Kuala Lumpur. Yep. If I had married a Bolivian, right?
You'd have gone there.
I would have gone there, right? And I think it's important to subvert that story about need. But of course, many of us do come here because we are economic migrants, because we do need to make a better life for ourselves. So I also don't want to pretend that's not true. So I'm always trying to make a story more complicated than how it's presented. Because I think the more complicated a story, the more human it is, the more real it is, the more authentic. All of us are here for multiple reasons, right? In the same breath that you're here to make life better for yourself, you're also proud to be a Nigerian, right? So, so I think that story about gratitude and luck is something that I struggle with a lot in the way that people talk about Africans in Australia.
Wow. Look, you dedicated your work to storytelling. I wanted to understand, why does story matter? Because I know we started this conversation with telling stories, but I wanted to go in a bit more. Why does story matter?
I guess there are many ways to answer that question. Before I was a writer, before I worked full-time in this thing you call storytelling, teaching people how to tell stories, etc. Before I did that, I worked in human rights and social justice. Yeah, I was in charge of a large philanthropic organization. We had a billionaire who was our founder, and we gave his money away. And I did that for many years, and I was the director of the foundation, and we had grants in excess of $50 million a year, and we and my team distributed that money across Southern Africa, focusing on human rights, democracy building. And one of the things that I realized, I had the opportunity to take a break. So I had been there for 7 years, took a break, took a sabbatical, 6 months. I was very fortunate. Yale University, I went to that campus for 6 months, and I could do whatever I wanted. It was just a break, a time to think. And in that time, looking at what it was that we were doing as a foundation and as a team and all the projects we were supporting and civil society in Africa, championing, the thing that I realized that we weren't doing very well was telling our own stories.
Where did we? Africans or people?
Africans.
Okay.
Africans, we were not telling our own stories. The people who were fighting for democracy, fighting for justice, were actually very happy for Western media to come and do the narration of, and in Zimbabwe there has been conflict around Mugabe, And so what happens there is you lose control.
They get distorted as well.
The story that is told, sometimes it might be right. If it's wrong,
depends on who is telling it.
Who knows? And you have no control.
Yeah.
Because once it's out, it's out. And you didn't determine what it was going to look like. You have no power in that situation.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm very interested in stories because telling your story is a measure of your power. Your capacity to tell it, and then your capacity to push for it to be shared in the right spaces, in the spaces that you want it to be shared in. For me, storytelling is really about power, and it's about control. In the best ways, right? Not power and controlling people in negative ways, but, we talk about power too. So storytelling is about the power to frame a narrative, not power over, power to.
What happens to a community that doesn't tell its story?
A community that doesn't tell its story is subject to whatever it is that happens to it from other people, what people determine, what people want to say about it. Then you really find yourself at the mercy of others. So, telling our own stories is powerful, but I also think it's important that we not just tell our own stories to other people. Because often, again, this is part of the function of being an impoverished continent, right? When people come and take your people, when people come and take from you, and then they use what they've taken to build their own wealth.
Yep.
What it means is that you can assume a position of having to beg them for what rightfully should be yours, because they have more power than you, right? So what that can often mean also is that you tell stories that you think they want to hear. Or you tell the stories that you want to tell, but you direct those stories at them. Why? Right? So I think so often our audience as Africans is other people. And I'm much more interested in the stories that we tell to one another, because that's where we grow. That's where we learn. That's where we undo so much of the brainwashing that tells us that we are simple people, that we should be grateful, that we should, all those external narratives that are being pushed on us, they also affect us. And I'm interested, to some extent, I'm interested because I'm in a place like Australia that we shift the narratives, and tell other people who we are. But I'm much more interested that we tell our own children, that we tell our own community these complex stories of ourselves, because it builds a certain kind of resilience. It builds a certain kind of self-pride. The things that you and I would have carried with us in our suitcase when we arrived in Australia, too many children who were born and grow up here, don't have that internal story that they're telling themselves about who they are, because no one has told them, and the society is telling them a different message. So that's why I'm interested in storytelling. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool to feel better and good about yourself, because you know that there are things to be proud of, but it's also a way, I think, to tell others who may have power over you exactly a measure of who exactly you are.
What are the forms of, because I hear you, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're more about verbal storytelling and written storytelling. Are there other forms of storytelling?
Yeah, I think I'm interested in all kinds of storytelling. I think if you put too narrow a definition on it, then there are ways that people are going to tell stories that even haven't been invented yet. We're living in times when technology is doing all kinds of things. So event plus meaning.
Events plus meaning.
That's a story. I'm completely agnostic about the nature of the story. I don't care whether it's a happy story or a sad story. I don't care about whether it's told in a cartoon, illustration, if it's told in dance. When someone tells you or shows you or draws you something that has a meaning, where they have pieced together something that they are giving you as a gift that says, this thing happened, and I will dance it into existence for you, or I will write it into existence for you, you understand it. So the other part, I suppose, that's really important to understand about a story is that it doesn't exist without an audience.
Without an audience?
Yeah. So if I tell a story to myself in a room, it's fine. But the reason why stories matter to human beings is because, I like to say this all the time when I'm working with people, stories are the oldest app for teaching known to humankind. If you wanted someone to learn something and you wanted a shortcut to how do I make sure that someone, right? An app is a shortcut, right? When we look on our phones and we're looking for an app, it's a shortcut so that I can get into that system quicker. So a story is, you need to think about it as an app for education. If you want a child to learn that fire will burn them, you can say, don't touch the fire. Or you can say, there was or in fact, the better one, the better analogy that I use all the time is you can tell a child, you know what, you will drown if you go next to that lake. But the better way for them to remember and to stay away from that lake is to say, a long time ago there was a monster, and it lived at the bottom of the lake, and it liked to eat children. So any child that goes near that place alone in the nighttime, the monster will take it. You will scare the child. You will teach the child, right? But what they have firmly in their mind is that a lake equals danger, right? So a story is an app. It's a shortcut to teach. That's how we as humans remember things, because we connect. Our brains, literally the neuroscience of storytelling tells us that when I'm telling you something, I will react emotionally when I put it in story format. I can give you information, your brain reads it in a particular way. I give you a story, and the neuroscience shows that in your brain, your brain lights up when I give you emotion. When we resolve the story, your brain does something else, and oxytocin is released, and that is exactly the same substance that's released when a mother is breastfeeding her child. So stories we are neurologically wired as human beings to not just tell stories, but to learn from stories.
I'm taking it in. I'm taking it in.
You should go online. There's a ton of great information about the neuroscience of storytelling. And that's why they're universal. So in every single culture, Africans love stories. We tell stories, great. But can you think of a single culture that doesn't tell stories? That's how we learn. That is what it means to be human, is to tell stories.
Most people have struggled to tell stories. I'll give you an example, right?
Yeah.
I, for one, I call myself an artist.
And a storyteller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, because it's been wired in our heads, stories are told or written. And so you tell yourself, am I actually a storyteller? And so I'll give you a good example. So before I started this podcast, I've looked for a few ways to express some of the things I have on the inside. I've tried different formats.
Yep.
Till I got here, and then I stayed. All right. But then also, in doing this as well, I'm now starting to create some shots. All right, talking in front of the camera and stuff like that. This is was something that I struggled with many years ago.
Why were you struggling? What's the hard part for you?
The hardest part was me saying to myself, I don't have stories to tell. Meanwhile, every day stuff is happening. How do I put it together? How do I put myself in a position where I can offload rather, whatever it is I've got up here, in here, rehearse it, and tell it.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I'm saying I'm not good yet. I'm just learning. But lately, I've come to say to myself, perhaps it wasn't a time yet. Perhaps mentally, I wasn't ready for it. But now I see, today I've got, ideas keep gushing, and I'm writing, and I'm saying to my wife, a few months ago, or let's say a year ago, I couldn't put many of these down. But now, because physically, mentally, I feel ready.
Yeah.
And now it feels like this drove of inspiration coming through, and I'm just doing stuff,
Right.
But a question to you, is that normal?
Yeah. So, most of the time, so I think storytelling is like so many other things. It's practice. It's a practice. So it's important that nothing that you just try to do can you do automatically, on the one hand. On the other hand, storytelling is so intrinsic to who we are as humans that we do it every day, all the time. You come home, how was your day? A series of events happened. If it's a boring day, that's just information. You're just giving your wife information. Oh, I went here and I went there. That's just information. I met this really interesting woman. Her name is Sisonke. And she told me this story. And you automatically will tell your wife a story, right? You'll not just tell her that you met me, you'll tell me what I said, and you'll tell her what you took from that. What was the lesson? What was the message that you took? That's storytelling. We do it naturally all the time. I think what happens is that when you're faced with a camera or you're faced with a stage, you have an event to do, then you think that you have to tell the story in a particular way. And this is where I come back again to, it's not just, for African people, it's not just about telling stories. It's about telling stories our way, authentically. Quiet people tell quiet stories. Loud people tell loud stories. African people may tell stories that go in circles and around the way. They may use proverbs, right? Because that's what is authentically comes to you. But because you've been told that you have to tell a story in how many seconds before 12 seconds before they switch off, right? All of that stuff, right? So we've been taught, again, a mindset and a framework that comes from this new world, contemporary, and some of it is true, but some of it, once you build the confidence, you can play with it. And you can recognize that actually, maybe this doesn't work for me. The thing that works for every storyteller is to be authentically themselves. This is like the first rule of storytelling. So if you try to be a storyteller who is, like extrovert. Hello, my name is, But if you're a quiet person, by the time it's the last sentence of that story and you're on that stage, you'll be talking like this. And people will experience you as having been pretending, right? They switch off. They're not going to stay with you, or they'll be confused. They're not going to be able to focus on what it is that you're trying to say because you started off talking really loud and now you're speaking very low, right? So if you're a low talker, start your story low, and people will, who I coach all the time will say, no, the last communications person I talked to said that, no, you have to speak up because otherwise people won't hear you. No. If you're telling a great story, people will.
Yes, sir.
They'll lean in. They'll come closer to you. It's a natural human instinct. This is what I say when there's a neuroscience to storytelling. If someone is authentically being themselves, natural human empathy. Emmanuel, if you speak low, I will lean towards you. You do it all the time. If someone speaks really loud, I'll move back a little bit because that's my comfort level. But I know that they're being themselves. And then, of course, I'm locked in and listening to what it is they have to say. And, of course, what keeps me interested and engaged is what they're saying. But if we fuss too much about the modality and the methods, it has to be perfect, it has to sound like this, then what we're doing is fitting into a very clear monotype, which is often a Western monotype, about what we think an extroverted person who tells stories. A griot doesn't care about those rules. Does an African griot care about those rules? A griot sings. Sometimes in a language you don't even understand, but you understand how it makes you feel. Right? Events plus meaning. If I can discern the meaning, I am listening to a story. And the form, the modality, the noise level, none of that matters. What matters is authenticity and not observing other people's rules about how it is that we're supposed to tell or listen to stories as Africans.
So if I hear you correctly, there are no modalities, there are no methodologies for effective storytelling.
There's some principles.
What are the principles?
So the first principle is be yourself, be authentic. Second principle is tell the truth. So be honest, because if you are not telling the truth, your audience will not trust you. They will detect that something is not quite right. It's linked to authenticity. Tell the story at the right time. So telling a story at the right time means that the story is ready to be told.
What is the right time?
The right time is once you know what the story is. So let's say today something happened to you, but you can't quite figure out why it happened. But it's an interesting series of events. Maybe you saw somebody running fast down the street, holding a lot of cash, and they bumped into you, and you fell down, you hurt yourself. So you want to be able to tell someone that story, but you actually don't quite know what happened. You don't know where they were going. You hurt yourself, so that feeling on your shoulder is actually quite painful. So you haven't made sense of it yet. So often a story needs time. It needs perspective. You need to be able to, oh my gosh, you know what? Someone else will give you another piece of information. Oh, that guy was running, they robbed a bank. Oh my gosh, and you know what? That person had a gun. You were very lucky that they just knocked you down. The meaning of the story becomes clearer because a series of events happened and you have more information and you can shape it. So then that becomes a story that you might have just told as an anecdote becomes a story about how I almost died and didn't. Right? You ascribe a different kind of meaning. It becomes a survival story rather than a different kind of story. So tell the story at the time that's right, which is when there's enough distance between the events and your understanding of the events. And then, of course, the most famous one that I say everywhere I go, and we teach this, and all these principles we teach in the work that I do at the Center for Stories, is tell a story from your scars, not from your wounds.
Okay, hold on.
So once you've healed,
okay.
Once you
Tell from your scars, not your
wound. So if it's a wound, then
Hasn't
it's still
healed yet.
fresh. It hasn't healed yet, and it may not be appropriate to share it. I think this comes back to a fundamental question we were talking about before about Africans and the stories that we tell when we are begging, when we want an audience to like us, to approve of us, to think that we're human, right? I think when a story comes from a place of woundedness, then we don't approach it with a sense of power and empowerment. When a story comes from having experienced something, whether it's racism or trauma, you've lived through it, you've healed from it, it might still be an emotional story, but you're in control of how you tell that story. You're not going to allow other people to hijack your story. I think too often in this country, but in many countries, the very powerful and painful experience of being a refugee, for example, if you tell that story and the audience looks at it as a story of pity, it can be very wounding, right? But if you've lived the journey, you've experienced it, you've healed from it, I think you'll tell it in a very different way. And there's some things about that story that you may keep to yourself. So I always say to people, telling your story doesn't mean telling everything. You have a right to privacy. Africans in particular, we have a right to say, this is my boundary. I'm not going to share every single thing about myself. It's about pride. It's about dignity. It's about saying that you don't have a right to everything about me, because sometimes sharing all those things about yourself can be weaponized against you. As Africans, we have to be clear about that.
True.
So when you tell your story from your scar, not from your wound, you are in much more control of that story and how it gets told and how you share it. And if people react badly, and I think many of us have been through this experience on social media, you might say something on social media and someone takes it the wrong way. If you're telling it from a scar, you'll be far less likely to be hurt by the reaction of people, because it's not still painful to you, right? We still have ego, and it can still, but it's very different. Imagine you're still traumatized by an event. You share it, people listen to it, and then they start laughing online. It's very different relationship.
How do you know then when you've healed enough to tell that story?
Some of that is why I insist that storytelling can never happen in isolation. So you can sit in front of a camera, Emmanuel, and practice telling a story. But a story that I think genuinely has resonance and that feels good is a story where you've practiced it in front of a trusted other. So in all of the storytelling sessions, the trainings that I do, whether it's written or whether it's spoken, and the reason why I'm a big fan of spoken storytelling is because the barrier is low. Most of us can speak. Many people struggle with writing, particularly in our communities, particularly many of our young people. They don't like, writing is a barrier. It's school, it's hard, they've been told it's something that they can't do, but we can speak, we can tell. We have memories, right? So when we do that, we do it with a group of other people, and that everybody has to share. So you have a strong sense of mutual vulnerability. It's not just me sharing and then only you listening. Because if I share and you don't share, then you have some level of power over me. So we all share, right? We sit together and we listen to one another and we give each other feedback. Not terrible feedback, constructive feedback. And in the listening and in the asking of questions, you'll say, I didn't understand that part where you said this. And if, when I'm telling you the story, I'm telling it in such a way, I keep on crying, I'm not ready to tell that story. And you can say, this is really upsetting you.
Isn't that authentic? Isn't that being authentic?
I think there's a very important, it's a great question, important distinction between being authentic and being wounded. Okay? So if tears come to my eyes in the story that I was telling you before about that beautiful memory I'm having of my mother, I could have told you that story and been crying. Okay? I could have had tears coming down my face, but I'm healed. So that would have been an authentic expression. Maybe you might have said something about a memory that you might have of someone you love, and that would have caused both of us to feel emotional. Feeling emotional is wonderful, and it's beautiful, and it's normal. And if I had cried as I told you that story, I wouldn't be embarrassed, I wouldn't feel anything. In fact, it might make us feel more connected to one another, right? And you would walk away and be like, oh, Sisonke told the story, she was so moved. But you wouldn't panic. If I am not healed, I am falling apart. I can't tell the story. Or I can tell it and it can cause great pain. And you, as the other person in the room, can feel the difference, right? There's a natural, so I can't give you, I said before, there's no methodology. It's no hard and fast rule, but we know as people, when something is simply too hard and someone is forcing themselves to do something because they think that that's the right thing to do, or that's because what the audience expects, people always want us to share our stories of how we came to Australia as migrants. That's the thing people are very interested in.
Yep.
How did you get here?
In my boats.
Exactly, right? And what if you did come by boat? And the memory of that is still very painful. But you feel like you've been invited now to a stage or to a conference, and they want to hear from Emmanuel, this young African who's got a story of resilience. The pressure to tell that story is immense. What Chimamanda calls the danger of a single story.
Yeah.
So there is a way in which we get pushed into telling a particular kind of story. And I know that pressure is very real for people. And if you don't give a storyteller permission to choose a different story, everybody has a million stories to tell. Choose a different story. Talk about the place where you came from, not the journey. Tell them that, we were just now talking about Nigeria. Tell them a story about Lagos. What it was like to grow up there. Beautiful story that has no trauma and no pain in it. Not because you don't feel pain, not because you haven't had trauma, but because your decision right now in this moment is that you're going to tell a different kind of story. A story that makes you feel good.
Good. So, if I hear you correctly, you as a storyteller should determine the story you want to tell, not what the audience want to hear.
Because then you're also making your audience grow up. We have a responsibility to mature our audiences. People only, if you feed a child only ice cream, the child is only going to want ice cream. But there's so many flavors in the world. So an Australian audience is used to hearing particular kinds of stories from Africans, and that's what they want all the time, and they're always going to ask you for that. Give them something else. Give them what you want to give them. So one of my rules as someone who facilitates and helps people to think about and share their stories is I always follow the storyteller. If you follow the storyteller, the story will take care of itself. What is going to make you feel the most powerful, Emmanuel? That's the question I ask you when you sit in front of me and say, I want to tell a story. What's the story that you've had in your mind, in your heart, that makes you feel the most powerful? Okay, that's the story we're going to tell. And sometimes that is the story about the boat and the trauma and the pain. And if we together are telling that story, and I can hear that you're ready, and you're going to tell that story in a way that feels good for you, then that's the story for it. So I'm not saying I don't want to hear it. But I am saying that I want you to think about and make an active choice that you're telling that story, not making the decision because people have told you that that's the only path. You see the difference?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this conversation further a bit. Storytelling. How do we monetize our story?
I wish if you could answer the question, please tell me the answer. I don't know.
I was expecting an answer from you.
No, I don't. I mean, obviously, there's some.
Because some people now, I want to tell a story.
Yeah.
But if I go telling stories, how would that fit me? Of what use is it telling stories when I can't?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, I think,
So from your experience.
Yeah, so from my experience, obviously, there are lots of ways to monetize. I mean, I've written 2 books that are, have been published, and every time someone buys a book, I get a very tiny royalty, and my publishers get more. So there are obviously ways that, storytelling can be monetized. There's Netflix, and there's, all the different streaming platforms, and of course, there are huge questions of access. Just the other day, a few weeks ago, I was watching this, with young people here in Australia at the Australian TikTok Awards. There was a whole big drama about, these incredibly talented African Australian TikTok, content creators who were being treated terribly by TikTok. They've learned how to monetize, right? But there's a barrier that they've reached, and they're being told, no one's going to look at your picture. Why are you here standing for photos, right? So I think there are lots of ways in the modern economy to monetize storytelling. But again, what it comes down to is having a very clear sense of your own narrative. When you control the narrative itself, it's much easier to monetize, because you will also make a decision about, this story is for sale and this one is not. This I keep private to myself and this I won't. For Africans, but for young women in particular, I think that's very important. I always say to young women, the world out there is big and it's harsh, and I want you to think about what you put out there. Think very carefully about what it is that you want to say, because once it's out there and can get weaponized, that's it. So be strong in your story. So I don't think people should be ashamed of anything that they do or say. And in order to not be ashamed of things that you do or say, you need to think very carefully about what you say. You know, what's out there in the world, especially in this modern digital age, you know. So yeah, I think there are lots of platforms. One of my very good friends, Santila Chingayape, she's a filmmaker. She's an author. She's incredible, of Zambian heritage, grew up in Perth, lives in Melbourne now. She makes films, you know, and she's constantly talking about how difficult it is to make African films with Australian financing that put ourselves at the center, you know, of the story. It's a very, very difficult thing to get into writers' rooms for mainstream, you know, shows on Stan and things like that. We need to be everywhere, right? So African storytellers are everywhere, or should be everywhere, but I think the barriers continue to be there for us in storytelling, as they are in every other, boardrooms, everywhere, right? It's the same struggle.
How do we, I don't know if it's possible. It is possible. How do we overcome that?
Yeah, it is
What
possible.
are the steps we need to take to start addressing that as a people?
I think the steps are the same as steps in any sector, and it's, again, it takes us back to this conversation about belonging. You know, I'm not really interested in fighting against racism so that my feelings, to make myself feel better. Racism means absolutely nothing to me personally, like interpersonal racism. I literally could care less, because I know who I am, so those words don't mean anything to me. I'm interested in racism to the extent that it stops me from being able to achieve my goals. So the extent to which racism puts barriers in front of me, puts barriers in front of my community, that I can't just do what other people do, right? So this is why, for me, combating racism is about, it helps us to put our stories everywhere. These structural barriers to African people being able to advance is as much an issue in storytelling as it is in everything else, in the media. More faces, more representation. And that just comes with us fighting inside and outside. So I'm not one of those people who believes, oh, you need to get on the inside, and then once we're inside, then we can start pushing for reforms. I'm not one of those people who says, no, we can't be on the inside, we have to be outside shouting on the street. We need to do it all.
Everything.
And we need to be constantly talking to each other. I respect everybody, everyone's fight. You know, when I get invited to be on a judging panel for an awards, so often in the writing world, they have these big prizes, and these are monetary prizes, but they bring prestige. They put a stamp on your book, and it says, you know, Stella Prize, you know, and when that happens, of course, I'm always reading very closely for the African writers. I want to, you know, I want to promote them. And of course, the quality of their work has to be good, you know, which it inevitably is, but I'm a voice in that room that can champion this person and this story, because I understand it, I understand the context it's written from. And so many of us are doing that all the time. I'm not, you know, I'm by no way am I, you know, an outlier. All of us are doing this, and that's how we get more African storytellers into rooms. That's how more of us get our stories onto the screens, onto ABC. How amazing would it be to have, you know, a soap opera, a drama like the Nollywood films that is here in Australia, because we have lives. We're very funny, we're very interesting. And you just need only look at social media, the number of you know, people who I follow, who are making reels and telling stories every day, which are hilarious and should be financed, should be on the big screen. Our stories are interesting. So
I had this question. I think you've talked touched briefly on it, but I'll ask it anyway. What is racism?
So racism is when someone or an institution uses their power to discriminate against someone on the basis of the color of their skin or their ethnicity. That's racism. Why do you ask the question?
So this is what I'm thinking, okay? So it's not, so I'm just trying to be the devil's advocate here, all right?
Course.
So in some cases, if you have to bring the race card, probably went for a job interview or something happened, but then you're looking at this person, I don't think you're qualified for that job. I don't think that role is suited for you. Or sometimes you could tell this might not be the best thing for you. You could do better.
Yeah.
But then to bring that card out, I remember a story, a friend once told me many years ago. He drove Uber, you know, and he was suspended by the Uber system,
yeah.
for something he did.
Yeah.
But then he said it was racism. When he was telling me the story, I asked a few questions. In my head, I was like, bro.
That was not racism.
But then we are sometimes too quick to call it racism, whereas it could also be our unpreparedness, our unprofessionalism, and things like that.
So part of when I say I'm deeply uninterested in interpersonal racism, it doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't penetrate my feelings most of the time. What I'm interested in is the racism that is cumulative, that has nothing to do with an incident like the one you've just told me your friend has experienced. When I say that we know statistically that if I submit my CV and my CV says Sisonke Msimang, I will not get a call back. They will not pick up the phone because they don't know how to pronounce the name. Somebody called Abdul, they can pronounce the name, but they see that it's a Muslim name. They will not get a call back. That is systematic, it's systemic, and you have no voice to even begin to have the conversation. That's the racism I'm interested in. The other ones we can always debate and have a back and forth about whether that my personal feelings. I'm more, and other people, and particularly young people in a school setting, when there is interpersonal racism where someone says something mean to you or terrible to you, of course I want to defend my children and I'm interested in that level of racism. But for me, as an adult African who came to this country already grown up, I can't be interested in chasing down racism and looking at shadows of racism. That is not interesting to me. The racism for Africans, for my community that I'm very interested in, no matter where I may ever be, no matter where I will go in the world, the racism I will be interested in is systemic. It's the one that doesn't care what your name is. It's the one that doesn't look you in the eye and call you any N-word. It's the racism that denies you job opportunities. It's the racism that makes sure that you have access to better health care. It's the racism that my friend and colleague, Professor Gathomi Katwiri, has cataloged in her massive research across Australia that looks at the experiences of Africans in Australia, which tells us that African doctors and nurses are routinely avoided when they're providing healthcare services. It doesn't matter whether you're a good doctor or not. The person will say, I don't want that doctor because you're black. The racism that says that when an African woman goes to give birth in a medical facility, the threshold for her pain is far higher, they assume, than a white woman. That's the racism I'm interested in. Doesn't care about your personality or whether or not you were suspended on Uber. I'm interested in systemic racism that doesn't even care what your name is.
I do have a point here. I agree with what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
There's an argument I want to put through.
Yeah.
Could it be that I know ignorance oftentimes do feel racism?
Yeah.
So the fear of the unknown often gives
makes people anxious.
And could that be a reason for many of us? I mean, for Africans in Australia, we're just recent migrants, to be honest, the last 15, 20, 30 years, to be honest, and many of our people here, Caucasians, do not really understand what it means to be African. They still feel you still live in caves and stuff like that. How do we address that? What do you think our Caucasian friends need to know about us to help them understand Africans better?
So I think Africans don't arrive in Australia without precedent. Africans arrive in Australia into a history that is already living and existing. And the history in which we arrive is one in which indigenous people have been treated terribly, dispossessed of their land, treated horrifically, and until 1967, not allowed to exist as even citizens in their own lands. We arrive in an Australia in which the White Australia policy only ends in the 1970s. So it's only for a relatively few decades that Australia has been a country that has not been overtly and in legal terms racist. So we, of course, can say that they don't know us and we're still new, but I'm not buying it for 1 second.
I give up.
Sorry.
I give up.
I appreciate your devil's advocate. I think we arrive here already perceived as other because we also know that Africans exist in the world's imagination. Yeah, so much of the storytelling and the conversations that you and I have been having, an African doesn't arrive as an unseen, unexplored, new
gender, race, or whatever. Yeah.
No, we exist and are seen and understood as part of a long continuum of race relations, and there are people who meet us and see us as we are, and they will accept us as full and proper human beings, and there are people who will not. And as society shifts and as people become more sophisticated and as we fight for our rights and all of that, those things will change. But you cannot tell me that I will ever be in a position of having to convince somebody that I don't come from a cave. I'm not interested. That I'm genuinely, truly uninterested in having a debate or discussion with anyone in which I must perform my humanity, prove to them who I am, that I am fully human.
Sisonke, what worries you most about the way boys are being raised?
Good question. I think
you got girls.
I have a girl and a boy.
Oh, sorry.
I have both.
Sorry.
I think so. I think about this actively as a parent who has one of each. I'm interested. I'm worried a lot. I worry a lot about the standards that are set for boys and girls, which I think serve as a cage for both of them. And so I think you can't worry about boys without worrying about girls. It's a different sides of the same coin. And increasingly with this social media, what we see is that the stories that boys are told about who they're supposed to be are very athletic and fit, handsome in a particular way. So all of that negative imagery that we've had for years on our girls, as soon as that phone was turned from something like this, something that we used to pick up like this, to something where you can look at yourself, we become overly self-involved, we become overly interested in how we look, and that goes for boys and girls. So that superficiality and that lack of depth has a terrible impact on what boys are supposed to be, because they're supposed to be handsome, they're supposed to be like all of those other things, but also macho, also never cry, like all of those stereotypes. I really, really worry about that for my son, and I worry about its consequences on him as an individual, as a black child, but I also worry about the consequences of that same training and behavior on my daughter.
What worries you the most as well? A follow-up to that question would be, what's your biggest worry about raising your kids?
In Australia?
In Australia.
Oh, so many. I don't even know. The list is too long. This conversation can happen for another 2 hours if I talk to you about what I worry about.
Skip it to 2 minutes.
I think the thing that worries me about raising children in Australia is the lack of a village. That community, that sense that everyone is responsible for everyone else's child. And that I think there is just so much pressure in the society put on the 4 or 5 people who live in that household, that immediate family network. Whereas, as we know, the people who teach our children are my sister who will have a completely special relationship with one child, and then my brother will have a completely special relationship with another child, and it makes them feel good and validated in different ways, and it means that I can relax, and I know that I don't have to always be teaching my child at every given opportunity. I feel like I have to constantly be telling me, this is how you behave on the street, this is what you do, this is what we do. I don't have to do that when there are 10, 15 other voices that can echo my same message. So that's what I really worry about the most, is a lack of a community and the same value system in this country.
What about them as African Australians?
Look, I mean, I've always had a very open, there's no way you were going to be raised in my household without being very clear on your own sense of pride and your capacity to speak back. So my kids are we've grown up with an open dialogue in our house. If something happens, I want to know about it, but I also want to know how they are prepared to deal with it. So we talk about racism a lot, and it, just to kind of go back to your challenge to me, I'm just as quick to say, that's not racism, that's you not doing your job properly. If I feel like what they're doing is using it as an excuse, I'm very happy and very quick to say to my kid, I don't think that's what's going on. But when it is, I'm also very, very quick to support them so that they don't feel like it's their burden. I always say to my kids, racism is not your fault. It's not a reflection on you. It's the other person's problem, right? So I think as African Australians, as it were, and if you ask my kids where they're from, they will tell you they're from South Africa, which is fascinating.
What does your dad think about that?
He loves it.
Oh, okay, that's good.
He loves it. He loves it, of course. But I think it's interesting that they've been raised most of their lives here. And if you ask them where they're from, they will say that they are South African. I think it speaks to the crisis of this country, where African children do not feel confident to say that they are African Australian.
I think that it's becoming a thing now, to be honest, because, I mean, there's this rise in Afro-identity. People are beginning to associate themselves with their parents' country.
Yeah.
Even though they were born or they grew up
That's
here and
right.
things like that, because I feel more alive when I'm with my own kind.
Yeah.
The humor will get it.
That's right.
I could say anything and you wouldn't take offense because
That's
we're
right.
just having fun, right? But you probably won't be able to do that if you're outside of your kind.
And that's a shame.
Yeah.
Right? And so that is both beautiful and wonderful. And so this is the question, again, that we get back to about what is the story that Australia is trying to tell itself, about itself. What is this place? What does multiculturalism mean? And in the best case scenario, we're building a society where our children feel very comfortable with one another. They don't feel that they are ashamed, that they have to pretend, that they can't eat their foods, and that they can't dress how they feel like. They feel very confident in that sense. And they also feel like they can play with their friends and have mates from across many different cultures. I want my children to be able to benefit from the multiculturalism that says the person sitting next to you in your classroom is of Pakistani heritage, and you can share food with them, and you can share jokes with them, and that you can genuinely connect. Because again, this is the most African of things, connecting with humans as humans. So we both want to use our culture and our stories as a place of safety, but we don't want to hide in our cultures. We don't want to feel like that's the only place that we can live. This is, I think, the balance. This is what a society that has a genuine vision and leadership and a long-term sense of what it genuinely means to be multicultural, that's where it should be trying to take us. That our kids can be anywhere and with anyone, including themselves and others equally freely.
Wow. Thanks so much, Sisonke.
You're welcome.
We can go on and on. Time is not on our side. But just, one more thing. Do you have any last words as we round up?
I don't know, Emmanuel. We've talked about so many different...
Got so many things I didn't cover, but time won't let me continue.
I think we've talked about a lot of different things. So, no, I appreciate. Thank you so much for the chance to get to know you a little bit better and to talk at you.
I enjoyed it.
My pleasure.